If an asteroid destroyed the Earth tomorrow, what if humanity would be saved? Think about that. Everything we've ever built, every museum, every language, every cuisine, every cathedral, every culture, gone. In an instant, what survives? A golden disk on the Voyager spacecraft, drifting through interstellar space with music and greetings in 55 languages, some radio broadcasts that have been leaking into space for over a century. The Arecibo message, beamed in binary code toward a distant star cluster in 1974, and, embarrassingly, the 1936 Berlin Olympics, one of the first signals strong enough to reach another civilization. I did a video on this, my Do Aliens Watch Movies piece, where I asked whether extraterrestrial civilizations might already be receiving our transmissions. I ended that video with a question. Will they remember us as stewards of Earth, seekers of truth, or will we be just another forgotten civilization, our stories lost in time? That question haunts me, because the answer depends on one thing. What did we distribute beyond ourselves? The only things that survive total destruction are the things we sent somewhere else. Everything we kept in one place, hoarded, concentrated, locked behind walls, is gone the moment the walls fall. That's true for an asteroid, but it's also true for a flood in New Orleans, for the Romans destroying Antigonea in a single day, which I filmed a video about standing on that hill putting you in situ 2,300 years ago. It's true for a language dying with its last speaker, for an Egyptian restaurant closing in Pittsburgh. The scale changes. The principle doesn't. What is distributed survives, what is hoarded is lost. I call this distribution exchange theory. Hey guys, Scott Layton here. My Expat Life on Renaissance Spirit channel, part of my The Smart and Savvy Traveler series, but so much more. We're walking today through Vlore, Albania. Today is 16th June 2026. It's a little after 6 p.m. Now, as we walk, I want you to look around at all of the empty places, the empty bars, cafes, and restaurants, the empty beaches, the empty beach chairs, everything, because that's a point I'm trying to make. I've been developing a coherent theory, at least I think it is, on some of the issues we face today, and I wanted to share it with you. Like my immigration video, which I filmed in Gjirokastër a few weeks ago, this one touches on politics, economics, culture, and something I've been wrestling with for a while. It starts with travel, what it's for, what it costs, and whether the world we know, the world of affordable international travel for ordinary people, is about to end, but it doesn't end there. Before we're done, I'm going to connect tourism to migration, to museums, to the fate of New Orleans, to a $65 million art trafficking scandal, and to a theory I think explains all of it. A few weeks ago, I read an article about how Albania has joined a coalition with Turkey, Germany, the UK, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, France, and Greece, 9 countries, in a coordinated effort to address what they're calling the tourism crisis. Greece alone welcomed 38 million tourists last year, 38 million, and a lot of that is still pent-up demand from the pandemic. People couldn't travel for 2 years, and now they're flooding everywhere all at once. And the strain is real. The infrastructure and hotspots can't handle it, the environment can't handle it, the local communities can't handle it. I see it here, I saw it in Saranda, the overbuilding, properties bought by people who will never live there, the place being reshaped for tourists while locals can barely afford to stay, a place being built not for the people who live in it, but for the people who visit it. That's over-tourism, and it's a problem, but it's not the whole story. The problem with modern tourism isn't movement itself. Humans have always traveled, traded, migrated, and explored. The problem is scale without relationship. A place stops being encountered and starts being consumed. The city becomes scenery. The people become service workers inside someone else's experience. Because here's the thing, travel is good. Seeing the world, experiencing other cultures, meeting people, learning how other people live, that matters. It makes you a better person. It broadens your understanding. I believe that. I'm living that. I walked with a friend yesterday. I'm meeting 2 more today. I'll probably have dinner or coffee with Father and some parishioners tomorrow. I become part of the community, however short my 1-month stay is. The people at the gym start to know me. The woman at the bread counter knows I don't like my bread sliced. I become part of the fabric. Am I taking advantage? Maybe. But I'm learning and growing too. Both a blessing and a curse? I can't honestly answer that. And that tension, that contrast, is what this video is about, because those two things are butting heads. Travel is valuable, but travel has a cost on the environment, on the places being visited, on the people who actually live there, and entire nations depend on tourism to survive. So the question isn't whether people should travel. The question is, what is travel actually for? What does it really cost? And what is the right way to do it? I think part of the answer is in how you travel. And I think the distinction most people miss is between sampling and savoring. Most people sample a night here, a night there, 5 cities in a week. Check Rome off the list, take the same Instagram photo everyone else takes at the same spot, fly to the next stop. That's not travel. That's photocopying someone else's experience. Make your own shot. Don't duplicate it because someone else did it. Live it, be it, and I won't lie. Part of the problem is structural. When I didn't have time to visit places, I sampled too. That's what happens when your employer gives you 10 days of vacation a year. You can't savor anything in 10 days. You're forced into the sampling mentality, not because you're lazy or shallow, but because the system doesn't give you enough time to do it differently. That's a big issue. Vacation time, fair wages. Without either, the whole argument is moot. You can't savor Vlore for a month if you don't have the time. You can't travel consciously if you don't have the money. Slow travel, real travel, requires both, and most people don't have either. What I do is slow travel. I stay in a place for a month, I walk, I find my routines. I was thinking about this yesterday. I found a path from my gym to my Airbnb, and I barely have to look up to find it anymore. That's a comforting thought. If I didn't know a place, really know it, I'd never have that feeling. And even if I had all the money in the world to travel anywhere I wanted, whenever I wanted, would I want to be in a different place every few days? No, that's exhausting. The needing a vacation from your vacation thing is real. Travel is tough. Finding your Airbnb, your hotel, exploring a new city, it can be fun, but it can also be nerve-wracking. Slow travel lets you actually settle in. Savor, don't sample. But distribution cannot mean permanent rootlessness. People need continuity too. Traditions need places where they are practiced deeply, not merely consumed superficially. The point isn't that everyone should drift endlessly. The point is that healthy cultures balance roots and exchange, stability, and openness. A tree without roots dies. But a tree sealed away from sunlight dies too. But real cultural exchange does not erase differences. In fact, it depends on them. Global consumer culture often replaces local identity with the same chain stores, the same luxury developments, the same algorithmic aesthetics everywhere on Earth. That isn't distribution in the sense I mean, that's homogenization. Distribution exchange theory is about preserving distinctiveness through mutual participation, not dissolving everything into one interchangeable global market. But it's not just how I travel. It's where I'm not doing the European Grand Tour. I'm not checking off Rome, Paris, Barcelona. I'm in Pogradec, Corsia, Gjirokastër. These are places most Western tourists have never heard of. And that's part of the point. I'm distributing myself into the margins rather than piling onto the pile. Going to places less traveled, less part of the European tour, less sowing my wild oats. That's a part of it too. And slow travel to places like these proves something. It isn't as bad for the environment or for local places as fast travel. Less carbon per day. More money into actual local hands. The breadwoman, the coffee shop, the gym, rather than resort chains. Deeper cultural exchange instead of extractive selfie tourism. But I'm not saying everyone should do what I'm doing, even if they could. My life isn't sustainable in the usual sense. I left America because I stopped agreeing with what America is becoming. I'm living on savings, visa hopping month to month, with a plan to settle in Albania or the EU when I'm 59 and a half and my retirement funds become accessible. That's my window. Not everyone has that window. And that's the point. I think the window is closing. Not just for me, for everyone. And to understand why, you have to see what tourism and migration have in common, because it's the same disease with different symptoms. I said in my immigration video in Gjirokastër that migration is driven by extraction economics. Companies won't pay living wages, so they import cheaper labor. People leave their countries because they can't survive where they are. Albanians leave Albania. Filipinos come to Albania. Americans come to Albania because it's cheaper than home. Everyone's looking for a better life. Tourism is the same phenomenon. The same extraction economics that drive migration also drive over-tourism. Cheap destinations get swarmed precisely because they're cheap, which means the local economy isn't paying its people enough, and the tourism money flows to foreign-owned hotels and booking platforms, not to the people who actually live and work here. Same system, different symptom, and this is where the economic truth becomes a cultural truth and a political truth, all at once. When wealth concentrates, communities die the same way cultures die when they're hoarded. The Egyptian restaurant in Pittsburgh closes because the economics don't sustain it, and with it goes a piece of cultural distribution that connected people to a world they might never otherwise encounter. Albanians leave Albania because wages are too low, and with them goes the culture, the knowledge, the fabric of a society. Serendipity gets reshaped for foreign investors who buy properties they'll never live in, and the locals who made the place worth visiting can't afford to stay. Economic hoarding hollows out communities. Political hoarding concentrates power, so governments protect extraction instead of protecting citizens. Cultural hoarding leaves everything fragile. One disaster, one war, one flood, and it's gone. It's the same principle, the same consequence every time. What is distributed survives, what is hoarded is lost. Whether you're talking about seeds, languages, Italian food, or money, that's what I call distribution exchange theory. And it ties directly into something I've been working on for a while: my social contract of the commons and my universal declaration on equality, human rights, and justice. The social contract says these things: resources, culture, civic life belong to everyone. The commons is all that is shared, held in trust, not owned. The universal declaration spells out the specific rights that make distribution possible. The right to rest and leisure, which is the vacation time argument. The right to economic security and the abolition of extreme wealth, which is the wealth concentration argument. The right to a healthy planet. The right to freedom of movement, that borders shall not be tools of cruelty. The right to property that shall not be concentrated in the hands of the few. The right to cultural expression, that no culture shall be erased or silenced. Distribution exchange theory is the mechanism that connects them. The social contract declares what belongs to all. The declaration protects the rights that make sharing possible. And the theory explains how it all endures, through mutual exchange, not hoarding. They're a trilogy, and this video is where they meet the road. So, what happens when the system that's already broken starts to collapse? Because I think that's exactly where we are. We are at the pinnacle of world travel right now, but I think it's also a cliff. The forces driving economic inequality, the growing concentration of wealth, debt, the displacement of workers by AI, rising costs of everything, these are going to squeeze disposable income for most people. Not just in the West, everywhere. The same race to the bottom I described in the immigration video. Country A gets too expensive, so companies go to country B, then country C. That dynamic doesn't exempt China or India or anyone else. China's population is declining. Only a small percentage of India's population has ever had the money to travel. The expanding global middle class that everyone points to? I think it's temporary. The structural forces working against it are the same ones that hollowed out the American middle class, and there's no reason to believe they'll stop at any border. Add climate change to that. Rising sea levels. Extreme heat making some destinations unviable. The cost of fuel going up. The cost of flights going up. The cost of everything going up. The world will contract travel because of cost, because of fewer opportunities, because of climate change, and because of the cost of travel itself. The era where hundreds of millions of ordinary people could afford to fly somewhere warm for a week, that might turn out to be a historical anomaly, a blip. And I think most people sense that even if they can't name it. That's why I'm doing this now, while the window is still open, slowly, honestly, imperfectly. But here's where it gets more interesting and more hopeful. If migration were more open and honest, If people could move more freely, culture would distribute itself naturally. You wouldn't need to fly to Cairo if there were a thriving Egyptian community in your city. In Pittsburgh, there was an Egyptian restaurant once. It closed. Had it stayed open, maybe if it had some subsidies, it would have whetted an appetite, given people a taste of something without anyone ever needing to board a plane. That's multiculturalism doing the work that tourism tries to do, but locally, sustainably, without the carbon footprint. If everywhere had pockets of multiculturalism, if every city offered that kind of cultural richness, people would have less need and less want to travel. Sure, people will still travel for world events, for weather, for certain destinations, but does everyone need to go to Rome or Paris every weekend? No. Everyone should be able to see a Rome or a Paris. Everyone should experience Venice, but not at the cost of the locals not being able to afford to live there, not at the cost of worsening the environmental damage. If people did it frugally, conscientiously, in shoulder season, it's less of a burden. Every place should offer the human-centric benefits of tourism. But no place should exist merely for tourism or for the economic advantage of a few, usually the rich, who can afford to buy multiple properties while locals get priced out. Curiosity about people and places and the world at large should be encouraged, but that curiosity should also explore how travel fits into the equation, the cost, the consequences. And this is where I have to turn the lens on myself and on what I do for a living. Let's face it, no one can see all of the world in one lifetime, and no one should try just to check off lists. Travel isn't about bucket lists. It's not just about relaxation. Some people go to Disney World every year, or Ocean City, or Vegas, or Rome, year after year the same place. That isn't the right mentality either. What is the real purpose of travel? What are the real costs, and what are the real benefits? And if you think about it, if people watch 100 travel videos on YouTube in a week, are they going to visit all 100 places? Of course not. So the video itself is the experience for most viewers, which means travel content has a responsibility to make that experience substantive, not a teaser trailer for a trip, but an actual encounter with a place. I don't want to go somewhere because I saw it on YouTube. I sample the world through movies like Indiana Jones, where places aren't just scenery, they're character. That's what drives most people to travel, I think. And that's what good travel content should do. Not say you need to go here. Open up the world, let people experience it. My video on Antigonea. Do you learn about Antigonea? Hopefully. I put you in situ 2,300 years ago. Even if you traveled there, would you experience that? Maybe, maybe not. Some places can be sampled in a YouTube video, a book, a movie, without ever needing to go there. That's not a lesser experience. That's a different kind of savoring. And maybe I should stop saying you should travel here in my videos. That's a valid self-criticism, because if distribution exchange theory is right, if distribution preserves and concentration destroys, then my job as a creator is to distribute understanding, not direct traffic. But even when travel is necessary, and sometimes it is, the way we move matters just as much as where we go. Imagine if a cruise ship did a trip from New York or Miami to Rome, slow, with stops along the way, not a loop. Not a floating resort that dumps 3,000 people into a port for 4 hours and circles back to where it started. An actual voyage. Point A to point B, with time in each port. That would replace flights. That would be better for the environment. That's how transatlantic travel used to work before cheap air travel killed it. The ocean liner wasn't a luxury cruise, it was transport. The journey was part of the experience. The modern cruise ship is the floating equivalent of sampling. What I'm describing is the Savor model applied to the journey itself. And then there are places that simply shouldn't be visited. If travel to Antarctica is bad for the environment, outlaw it. Sure, I want to see penguins in their natural habitat before I die, but knowing that not visiting them will help them survive. That's part of the point, isn't it? We can't see everything. No one should try. Travel should help the traveler and the place they're traveling to. When it can't do both, you don't go. You love some places enough to leave them alone. And then there's the harder question. What about places that can't sustain themselves? Every place should be as sustainable as it can be. And a deeper truth, if it isn't, should it exist? This is going to be the most controversial part of this video, but I think it needs to be said. Let's look at New Orleans as just one example. I read 2 articles recently about New Orleans. One argued that the city has passed the point of no return. Sea levels rising, land sinking, the city potentially surrounded by open water within generations. The other argued that New Orleans deserves investment and ambition, not abandonment. They pointed out that Phoenix, Arizona survives on a 336-mile aqueduct pumping water through the desert, and nobody's asking those residents to leave. Why is New Orleans expendable? I love New Orleans, but I think the future of New Orleans as a physical place is over. I don't think you can build enough dams, walls, or levees to change that fact. If it can be saved, it should be, but not every place can, and the costs don't always justify it. This isn't an argument against fighting for places we love. It's an argument for honesty about limits. The purpose of preservation is ultimately human flourishing, not the indefinite maintenance of geography regardless of cost. Sometimes preserving a culture may require helping it migrate rather than forcing it to drown where it began. What I think the people of New Orleans should do is move not into ghettos or enclaves, which lock culture behind walls, but into the fabric of other cities, carrying the cultural legacy with them. The music, the food, the way of being in the world, it travels with the people, not with the geography. Houston already experienced this after Katrina. New Orleans culture didn't die when people moved. It seeded itself into new places. And then there's the other side of that coin, the Netherlands. They chose to fight the water, and so far they've won. They built the dikes, the dams, the barriers. Should they keep expanding? I don't have an answer to that. But there is a cost. There's always a cost. And not every place has the resources or the will to fight the way the Dutch have. Should Phoenix or Las Vegas exist? Probably not. Nor should big agriculture exist in the desert if it means pumping water from elsewhere. Nor should cities that are ravaged by destructive storms every few years. I'm not the first person to make these claims, and as the climate worsens globally, these conversations will only grow. The honest question is whether the cost of sustaining a place justifies itself, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and knowing the difference requires honesty, not ideology. And that brings me to what I think is the deeper truth in all of this, the core of distribution exchange theory. The only way to preserve is to distribute. That's the purpose of the seed vault in Svalbard. They didn't build it because seeds are safe where they are. They built it because crops fail, wars happen, climates shift, and the only defense against total loss is having a copy somewhere else. Antigonea was destroyed by the Romans in a single day. Whole civilizations have been wiped out by wars. That's a crime and a sin. Troy fell, and its knowledge would have been lost entirely had it not been for those who remembered it, who told the stories, who carried the artifacts. Was Homer's version diluted? Of course. But without that dilution, we'd know nothing. The Iliad is the most famous act of cultural distribution in human history, and it preserved enough for someone to find the city thousands of years later. Sure, there's a risk of dilution when culture spreads, but total loss is the greater threat to humanity. And I can prove it with something you eat every week. Italian Americans created a new cuisine and changed the old meatballs on spaghetti, chicken parm, red sauce. None of that is traditional Italian. But in doing so, they also preserved a legacy of what came before. Some of the most authentic versions of old regional cooking exist in American kitchens, not Italian ones, because the immigrants held on to what they left behind while the homeland kept changing. And the new cuisine became its own tradition that made billions of people care about Italian food who would never have encountered it otherwise. Nothing was lost. Something was added, and Italy still has its Italy. In Pittsburgh, we say "red up," meaning to clean or tidy with our rhotic accent, preserving a bit of Elizabethan English that would have been lost in the UK. The colony preserved what the motherland discarded. No archive, no institution, no Alliance Française. Just people carrying language with them when they migrated and passing it to their kids. I watched some videos recently on language, how English became the lingua franca, how languages die, the various stages of a language disappearing. There's a woman in Chile, the last native speaker of her language, who chose to preserve it archivally. She understood that an imperfect record is infinitely more valuable than no record at all. She chose the archive over purity. That's the same principle. Distribute to preserve, because when the last speaker dies and there's no archive, no recording, no one who carried even a fragment of it somewhere else, it's gone, forever. Total loss. Does France need organizations like Alliance Française to protect its culture? I don't think so. The cultural France we know and love will exist, more or less as it is, 300 years from now, because people love it and want to preserve it. The counter-argument that Italy stagnates because it doesn't change, I think that's a false dichotomy. The things about Italy that people don't like could change, but there can still be the food, the architecture, the music, time, wars, climate. They change everything. But doesn't Italy, doesn't France have a better chance of keeping their culture 1,000 years from now through a certain amount of exposure and distribution? That's why I'm against enclaves and ghettos and gated communities. They lock what should be expanded. What is shared survives. What is hoarded is lost. Which brings me to something I read this week that shook me, an article in The Atlantic about a family of Armenian antiquities dealers, the Simonians, who trafficked $65 million worth of allegedly looted Egyptian artifacts into the Metropolitan Museum and the Louvre Abu Dhabi. They forged provenance documents on an old typewriter. They invented fake ownership histories. They used the museums themselves as laundering mechanisms. And here's what got me. The head of the Paris Louvre, Jean-Luc Martinez, literally wrote the playbook on how traffickers launder looted antiquities, a 50-point plan for UNESCO. He warned about dealers who invent stories, fabricate documents, use prestigious museums to legitimize stolen objects, and then his own institution did exactly that. The Louvre Abu Dhabi paid $40 million for a marble head that may have been looted, while Martinez's plan sat on UNESCO's desk. Now, I once bought a Louis XVI gold coin through heritage auctions back in Pittsburgh, a 1793 coin, the year they executed him. And I made a good faith decision to return it to France. I thought that was the right thing to do. Cultural stewardship, repatriation, giving it back to where it came from. But after reading this article, I thought, wouldn't it have been better in a Pittsburgh museum? This isn't the Elgin marbles or the Benin bronzes stolen from Nigeria, clear cases of colonial theft that should be returned. My coin wasn't stolen from France by colonial violence. And if France itself is functioning as a node in a trafficking network, if its institutions operate on what one of the dealers called a knowing pantomime, where everyone puts a bag over their head, then what am I repatriating to? An artifact without the people who gave it meaning is only a relic. Rome could parade the menorah through its streets, but if the Hebrews themselves had vanished entirely, what would the object have meant? Culture is not the artifact alone. Culture is the living relationship between people, memory, ritual, language, and meaning. Preservation that destroys the people while keeping the object is not preservation, it's taxidermy. But not all distribution is good. Empires distribute power, algorithms distribute outrage, colonial systems distributed language and religion through violence. Extraction distributes dependency while concentrating wealth. So distribution exchange theory is not a defense of diffusion for its own sake. The question is whether exchange preserves the agency, dignity, and continuity of the people involved. Distribution without reciprocity is just another form of conquest. People, museums, and cultures should borrow from one another. We're all migrants as humans after all. But not to the detriment of one over the other. That's the line between sharing and theft. And my theory gives you the test. Who benefits? If both sides benefit, share freely. If only one side benefits, it's not sharing. It's extraction. The Simonians were criminals, but the underlying impulse, getting objects out into the world, isn't wrong. The crime was the deception and the theft, not the distribution. Done honestly, through loans, exchanges, migration, open cultural sharing, distribution is the preservation strategy. So after all of that, the economics, the politics, the culture, the museums, the forecast, what does distribution exchange theory actually come down to? What's the simplest version? I make friends wherever I go. But the other side of that coin is that they make friends of me. They wouldn't do that if they didn't gain something from the experience. That's exchange, not extraction. That's how friendship works. But it's more than that. It's more than transactional. It's connecting to people, to places, to ideas, to cultures. It reminds us that we're all the same species, the same race, 99.9% the same. And our similarities, they show us ourselves. When I sit with Father and his parishioners, when I walk with a friend through these streets, when the woman at the bread counter remembers how I like my bread, I see myself reflected in people who grew up in a completely different world than I did, and that reflection is humbling. But it's the differences that drive the rest. The differences are what drive curiosity, change, growth, appreciation, respect, gratitude, thankfulness, and awe. The way someone cooks a meal you've never tasted, the way a language shapes a thought you couldn't think in English, the way a city built on a hillside 2,000 years ago still holds people's lives inside it. And isn't that what all of this should be about? Isn't that what life should be about? Isn't that what travel, economic equality, stewardship, preservation, conservation, sharing, environmental protection, cultural exchange, all of it should be about? Connecting us to one another, reminding us that we're the same, and letting the differences make us better? I think everything should work the way friendship works. Tourism should work like friendship. Cultural exchange should work like friendship. Migration should work like friendship. When both sides gain, it's healthy. When only one side gains, it's exploitation, whether that's a cruise ship dumping tourists for 4 hours, or a family forging documents to sell looted artifacts, or a system that pays people too little to live in their own country. We're at the pinnacle of world travel right now. I think it's also a cliff. The window is closing, not because of wise policy, but because the economics and the environment won't sustain it. And that may not be entirely a bad thing. But while the window is still open, I'm walking through it, slowly, to places most people have never heard of, trying to savor, not sample, making friends, learning, becoming part of the fabric, however briefly. That's distribution exchange theory. What is distributed survives. What is hoarded is lost. It's an economic truth, a political truth, and a cultural truth, and it connects directly to my social contract of the commons and my universal declaration on equality, human rights, and justice. I'll link those below, along with my immigration video and the aliens video I mentioned at the top. They're all part of the same argument. They're all part of the same project. And if that asteroid ever comes, I want humanity to have distributed enough of itself, enough of its culture, its music, its languages, its stories, its food, its love, that something of us survives, not on a golden disc, in each other. Civilization survives not because stone monuments endure forever, but because human beings carry meaning forward into other people. Savor, don't sample. Here's a few tips to add to what you've been seeing on the walk. If you travel, go to places that either are unexplored or have the capacity to travel. Visit in what those in the business call shoulder or off-season. In other words, don't go at the same time that everyone travels to. For many places, that means summer in your destination or around holidays. Unless you want to see the Christmas markets in Germany in December or Hajj for Eid al-Adha in Mecca, avoid those places when you know everyone else will be there. Remember those empty seats you saw in most of the video. Eat earlier or later than most people. In other words, schedule your activities around everyone else. If the museums get busy at 10, go at 9. Instead of visiting on a weekend, go during the week if you can. You get the idea. But let's talk about this beautiful city of Vlore more as an example, because what you're seeing on this walk is the theory made visible. Vlore has lost a quarter of its population since 2011. Over 26,000 people have left. The city is shrinking, down to about 78,000 residents. And the people who leave do so for the same reasons I talked about in my immigration video. The wages aren't enough. The opportunities aren't here. The extraction economics push people out, and in their place, over 2,400 accommodation listings. A brand new international airport built specifically to bring tourists in. New luxury resorts going up along the coastline. They didn't build all of this for the people who live here, and they built it for us, for tourists. And right now, in mid-June, most of it sits empty. You've been watching it on this walk, the empty bars, the empty cafes, the empty beach chairs. This is what overbuilding looks like. A city that loses its people and replaces them with infrastructure for visitors who come for 2 or 3 months a year. July, August, maybe a little of September, and then vanish. The developers are betting on a tourism boom. But if my forecast is right, if the window is closing, if disposable income contracts, if travel gets more expensive and less accessible, then what happens to all of this? What happens to a city that hollowed itself out for tourists who stop coming? That's distribution exchange theory in concrete and beach chairs, a place reshaped not for the people who live in it, but for the people who visit it. The same pattern as Sarand, the same extraction economics. And down the road, literally down the road from here, the Zvërnec protests, the Flamingo Revolution, 4 billion euros of speculative development on protected wetlands where flamingos nested for the first time in 2025. I've been covering that story. It's the same story. Every place should be a place to live, not just a place to visit. And if Vlore's own people are leaving while the beach chairs multiply, something has gone very wrong. Not with tourism itself, but with what we've let tourism become. As always, thank you for walking with me. And until next time, live the Renaissance spirit.